I'm glad that you all decided to stay today for my session. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my research along with my research team, a research project that we're working on that seeks to address an important national problem that is present in our society today, the problem of literacy. But before I get into defining what the problem was and showing you the way that we're seeking to address it with the digital tools, I wanted to introduce the research team. We call ourselves the Literacy Collaborative Research Team. And we're found at the University of Cincinnati. The people involved in the research team is Dr. Beth O'Brien, who is an assistant professor of psychological foundations of education. Dr. Allison Brett Smith, an assistant professor of literacy. Dr. Pamela Williamson, an assistant professor of special education, and then myself, Reneé Seward, who's an assistant professor in design and education. I'm actually the one that started this research about 5 years ago, and this began as thesis work. I'm actually a graphic and digital designer, so I have that background, and I've been joining myself with the educational field because I think that what I do could help in the visual communication of what you do. So another term for us are visual communicators. I found out this problem from actually seeking to address it dealing with dyslexic students because of a friend of mine who had a dyslexic child, and he was describing his problems with reading, and I looked at it and said, you seem to be talking about a graphic problem there. And from my ignorance of it, I started to dig in deeper from the cognitive and educational field to try and seek of what can I do from my background paired with you all to help address a problem. Reading is a fun and growing activity that opens the window to endless opportunities. It's also a complex skill that is essential for the success in our society. Yet, with that being known, the importance of reading, there are 36% of 4th graders and 28% of 8th graders who cannot read at base level. And if those statistics were not dramatic enough, if we look a little bit further at low-income families, we find that 4th graders in low-income families, there's 17% scored at or above proficiency of reading levels. And if we look at the idea of African Americans, 4th graders, it gets just a bit more scarier there. To continue to define this problem, because I'm coming at it from a graphic design and we got to understand the problem and research it before we start to make anything. But to continue to define it, we looked at this idea of how it's costing us in money. So if we look at 2006 and 2007, approximately 2.6 million children receive special education service for specific learning disabilities. And if we're talking money, at an annual cost to a taxpayer, that's $6,000 per student. And the largest percent of them dealt with reading disability problems. So I found this to be a very advantageous project. The statistics have proven that there is a connection between failure to effectively learn to read as well as other problems that we have in our society dealing with crime, high school dropout rate, and adult poverty. Some of those statistics, just briefly, are over 70% of the inmates in American prisons cannot read at 4th grade level. I keep imagining myself of what interventions could happen that had got them into reading quicker, so maybe this statistic wouldn't be so. And if we look at the 78% of the juveniles who commit crimes are dropouts, and how could we have gotten them engaged so that they go all the way? And if we just look at the lowest level of literacy proficiencies, 43% of them live in poverty as opposed to those with high literacy levels, and there's only 4%. But those are the statistics of the literacy problem. But the bigger question is, why are there people out there that have this low proficiency? And we do know that there are two factors that play a role in it, both environmental and biological, from the parents just not reading to the child at an early age, or possibly something inside such as dyslexia. Yet, we also know that preventive measures could resolve a majority of the reading problems faced by children today and adults if they were addressed at an early age. So this idea of reading is actually a pretty complex problem, but the simple model of it breaks down to look at decoding and comprehension. The steps of acquiring reading begin with the alphabetic principle and move to phonology, and then through practice we get this idea of comprehension that breaks out into several more complex steps. And for me, being a designer coming into how complex this problem is, I found this chart very interesting. The research and the focus of our research that we're working on, we're focusing on the phonological aspect of reading. Our long-term range is to help educators more effectively teach decoding skills to at-risk students, and we're concentrating on the early sound-to-print phonics training that is enhanced with digital interactive tools that dynamically build a visual relationship with the phonemic sound. Now, I'll suggest to you at the end of this presentation that we have not forgot about comprehension and the fact that decoding and comprehension could be nested into one to bring something forward, and I'll address that just a little bit later. But the research that we're using to help support us in this theory definitely deals with Lieberman's research as well as Bradley and Bryan's research, who showed that there's a causational connection between phonemic awareness and reading. Louise Motes is someone else that we're looking at with this. Her quote says it in this way: "One of the most fundamental flaws found in almost all phonics programs includes traditional ones, that is that they teach the code backwards. That is, they go from the letter to the sound instead of from the sound to the letter. Such programs disregard the fact that speech evolved 30,000 years before writing actually did." And we've been looking at this idea of what are the major issues that are addressed from teaching it from letter to sound, and there's three problems which I just want to go over very quickly. The idea of completeness. If we start with the letter and these are the sounds that belong to them, we forget these sounds because there isn't a specific letter that's denoted to them, but a combination thereof. And then there's also the idea that there is the confusion of the letter name with the letter sound. If we just start teaching them what the letter name is, when we get them to wanting to read the word us, we hear words like use because they're confusing the sound with the actual name. And the third problem is the confusion with sight words and the letter sounds that they belong to. We're trying to teach them the letters here, so we group these words in a list, when actually they make a different beginning sound, each one of them. And they should probably be put in their own list where their sound is specific to them. So essentially, we're trying to figure out how to teach reading that begins to emphasize the 44 common sounds to the English language. Now, currently there are two major approaches that contribute to preventing of reading failure. There's the response to reading. We want to get it early and give them extra time. And the universal design principle of coming up with a method for teaching that no matter what their reading challenges might be, it allows them to learn. But there's still several unresolved issues with this idea. Some of them are the most effective ways to teach phonics to at-risk children, which is what we're seeking to do, and the best method for individualizing instruction in order to pinpoint specific problems that one child might be dealing with versus another, and how to engage any combination of learning pathways that will really help a child learn. Without alternative teaching methods to those currently available, the achievement gap in at-risk children will only persist and increase with age. So the Seward reading innovations, there are several things that we're seeking to do. One of them is to teach sound-to-print phonics training, and through doing that, build a visual relationship between the letters and their sounds in a dynamic way. the cue, and we're also looking to cue the student to produce their own sound, which I'll talk about in a minute, versus the other technologies that I see out there that are kind of sort of doing what I was looking at. And it allows for self-directed learning that cues the student to decoding the sound while actually in the context of reading. They're having this trouble when they're in the process of reading. How can I give them the clue there? And allow the educator to learn at what point or juncture is the student struggling with. It allows the student to engage any combination of pathways, whether it be visual, whether it be auditory, or even some type of kinesthetic muscle memory. Essentially, we're looking at creating multisensory on-screen reading experiences. So the types of assistive tools that I was finding out there are the ones listed on the screen. And how what I'm looking at differs from what they're doing is that most time these programs only give auditory feedback of the correct pronunciation of the word, which allows the student to comprehend the specific words in order to get through the text. But it doesn't teach them the broader decoding skills to the reading situation. And so what they also just give the answer. The things that I'm looking for cues them. How can they figure out what the answer is through the visual ideas? So just to give a little tease of the things that I'm talking about. Say a student is on screen reading and they can't remember what sound this phonemic sound makes. Well, if we're dealing with touchscreen technology such as the iPad, they can use their finger to draw it in the way that you draw the letter form, so that initiates the muscle here, and this initiates the cue to come up. If we're talking about using a mouse and a cursor, then it is the cursor being there, and they can click on it and receive a clue that says magnet, magnifying glass, milk. What was the common sound that I heard from saying those images? This says So then also, if I can show the example with the P, they can't remember what the sound is that belongs to this. Again, by using muscle memory, if we're talking about touch screen to initiate the cue, or just by clicking the button, we can get peach, pea, pie. What's the common sound I heard there? Puh. They get the clue. They can keep on moving through the text in the context of actually reading. Other things that I've been looking at is this idea of kinetic images, moving images, and onomatopoeia sound to again cue them to the sound that they're dealing with. So we have the letter B here, and we can't remember what sound it makes, and you can get a visual clue in that way, or with the P. I'm trying to figure out how is this idea of narrative and storytelling and moving image, which is something that we deal with a lot, and we have a lot of theories on as graphic designers, helps one to remember. I'm trying to also give other clues of how to distinguish between one letter or another, that B is squishy this way versus P being squishy this way. Any means that I can to help them remember what sound or trigger what sound belongs to what letter form. The tool that I'm also creating is seeking to be a scaffolding tool with a number of those other technologies that I showed you earlier. They'll probably always need that to get that auditory clue of what is that word. But how can I give this tool to them for a while and slowly take them from an illiterate reader into an independent reader? And at the first level here, they're just going to become familiar with what are the mnemonic devices, what are the images that become associated with the different sounds to help them remember. Then at the second level of it, they'll start seeing it in word form to realize that these sounds actually belong in several different words to help you remember. And they'll also be figuring out how is it that I initiate to get my clue. And then in the third level, they'll actually be in the context of reading something, so that when they struggle or run into a sound that they don't know how to pronounce, they can click to receive their clue. And then slowly weaning them off of the different clues that they can have versus it being sound in the image. So just an example here of the static images. The student is reading on screen, and beginner readers, we use our finger like this, and we move through and we run across a phoneme that we can't remember how to pronounce. We can click on it and we can get the series of images that will cycle through. Peach, pea, pie, what's the common sound there? It's puh. And then they can keep moving to the next one. I wanted to also make this clear that this isn't a computer game or something that's put on a computer and sat in the corner and told the child to go there and figure out how to read. This is a teaching tool for the educator. It's meant that the child comes in and engages with this system, and from the back end the teacher can come in and figure out, well, what are those sounds that Jimmy keeps clicking on because he can't remember? And then I one-on-one can go back and reinforce these sounds with Jimmy. So this is a tool to aid the teacher in trying to figure out who's struggling with what. I've also been looking at the idea of comprehension because I haven't completely isolated or thrown that out of the window. But how is it that there could be moving image embedded inside of it that suggests to them what the word may be? So here we have the word octopus. By clicking on the O, you can receive the visual clue of octopus. Where are we with our research right now? I feel like we're at similar places from the other presenters that are here today. We're at the point where we're trying to acquire grant money to do testing to verify whether Seward reading tools are more effective than traditional classroom methods in assisting students to effectively learn to decode letters and text. As well as, is this a tool that aids the teacher in better understanding where they're struggling with? And the testing group that we're looking at most specifically are kindergarten students in urban schools where income, status, and ethnic background increase the proportion of students at risk for developing reading difficulties later on. So the broader gains of the tools that we're seeking to, we are in the process of developing, and it allows the student to learn to read using his or her learning strengths, to demonstrate the relevance of teaching reading with digital tools that create multisensory on-screen reading experiences. This idea of universal design, they can clue into whatever is at the auditory or the visual that they need to help remember, and to help educators close the achievement gap so prevalent in the nation's educational system and could potentially benefit students all over the world. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
This is pretty brand new research. I'm only aware of 2 other studies that have worked in a similar way. Give me your card, I can give you the reference.
Thank you.
So I'm afraid there are not very many questions because it's so new.
All right. Yeah, I've been working on it for about 5 years now, just starting in my graphic design, and my friend's child over here pestering me about him not being able to read because the way the page was laid out. And I said, I design pages. What about that page was confusing for you? And, you know, I got to talking to him, and then it just made me want to talk to educators even more. And now I'm invested in this in a deep way.
We've designed some sort of a computer-assisted tutoring program to help children who are struggling readers to learn how to read, and it uses a lot of similar principles, so I'll share you with you our research on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.